Some people go through life never knowing what it means to be truly seen. Eleanor Hartwell spent 23 years believing she was one of them. She lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of a frontier town that wanted nothing to do with her. The neighbors whispered and kept their distance. She learned to expect cruelty, not kindness. One winter night, after being driven into the frozen woods by harsh words and cold hearts, a mountain man found her crying in the darkness. He didn't walk away. He sat with her. He listened. And when she finished telling him about all those lonely years, he looked her in the eyes and said two simple words that changed everything. "Marry me." Why would a stranger offer his heart to a woman the world had abandoned? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin stood where the forest met the grassland, a solitary structure of weathered pine logs and a stone chimney that leaked smoke on windy days. It was small, just one room with a sleeping loft, but Eleanor Hartwell had made it hers over 23 long years. The wooden cross her husband had carved hung above the door, its edges smoothed by time and weather, a silent guardian of a threshold few ever crossed. Every morning began the same way. Eleanor rose before dawn, when the air was still cool and the world held its breath between darkness and light. She would kindle the fire in the stone hearth, coaxing life from last night's embers with dry kindling and patience. The kettle went on for coffee. Real coffee was a luxury she allowed herself once a week, the rest of the time making do with roasted chicory root. While the water heated, she would step outside to assess the day. The garden plot beside the cabin demanded constant attention. In the growing season, she tended beans, squash, potatoes, and carrots. She had learned which plants could survive the harsh winters of Cedar Falls and which were too delicate for this unforgiving land. Her hands, once soft and unmarked, were now calloused and strong. She could turn soil, pull weeds, and harvest vegetables with an efficiency born of necessity. Every potato she dug, every bean she picked, was another day she would survive. Water came from the creek a quarter-mile away. Twice daily, Eleanor made the walk with 2 wooden buckets suspended from a yoke across her shoulders. The path was worn smooth by her footsteps, thousands upon thousands of journeys over more than 2 decades. In summer, the walk was pleasant, almost meditative. In winter, it was treacherous, the path icy, and the creek sometimes frozen over, requiring her to break through with an iron rod she kept for that purpose. She had arrived in Cedar Falls as a young bride of 19, full of hope and dreams. Her husband, James Hartwell, had been a good man, quiet, hard-working, devoted. They had met in Street Louis, where her father worked as a clerk, and James had come to purchase supplies for his homestead. He had courted her properly, speaking to her father, bringing small gifts, making promises of a life together on the frontier. She had said yes because she loved him, but also because she longed for adventure, for a life beyond the narrow streets and narrower expectations of city living. Their marriage had been brief, only 8 months. 8 months of learning to be a wife, to cook over an open fire, to preserve food for winter, to make a home in a wilderness that cared nothing for human comfort. 8 months of happiness, of shared work and shared dreams, of quiet evenings and whispered plans for the children they would have. Then came the day that changed everything. James had gone into town for supplies. She had stayed home, feeling unwell, hoping it might be the first sign of the pregnancy they both wanted. He never returned alive. There had been an altercation at the saloon. The man named Tucker had made crude comments about Eleanor, suggesting she had no business on the frontier, that she was too refined, too delicate, that she would ruin a good man. James had defended her honor. Words became shoves, shoves became fists, and then Tucker had drawn a knife. James died in the street outside the saloon, bleeding out before the doctor could arrive. Tucker claimed self-defense, said James had attacked him first. The witnesses, all friends of Tucker, supported his story. No charges were filed. Tucker walked free. And then the whispers began. If Eleanor hadn't come to Cedar Falls, James would still be alive. If she hadn't been so refined, so obviously out of place, Tucker would never have made those comments. If she had gone to town with her husband that day, maybe she could have prevented it. The logic made no sense, but grief and guilt rarely do. The town needed someone to blame, and Eleanor Young, alone, an outsider, became their target. She had tried, at first, to remain part of the community. She attended church services, sitting alone in the back pew. She shopped at the general store, speaking politely to the merchants. She offered to help with community events, to contribute what little she had. But the doors closed, one by one. Martha Henley, the merchant's wife, and the town's self-appointed moral authority made it clear that Eleanor was not welcome. The reasons were never stated outright, but the message was unmistakable: leave or be shunned. Eleanor had nowhere to go. Her parents had died of fever the year before her marriage. She had no siblings, no other family. The cabin and the small plot of land were hers. James had seen to that in his will, but they were all she had. She could not afford passage back to street. Louis, and even if she could, what waited for her there? Nothing, no one. So she stayed. And the years passed, each one blurring into the next. The townspeople maintained their distance. Children were warned to stay away from that woman in the woods. Merchants served her, but would not speak to her beyond the bare minimum. Reverend Thomas, a kind man who seemed troubled by the situation, nonetheless did nothing to intervene. The social order of Cedar Falls demanded Eleanor's exclusion, and few had the courage to challenge it. She learned to live with the silence. She learned to find companionship in the chickens she kept for eggs, the occasional deer that wandered near her garden, the ravens that perched on her roof and called to each other in voices that sounded almost human. She learned to be content with her own company, to fill the empty hours with work and more work, until exhaustion claimed her each night, and she could sleep without dreaming. Her rare trips into town were exercises in endurance. She would hitch her old mare to the small cart James had built and make the 3-mile journey to Cedar Falls. The general store carried the supplies she could not make or grow. Herself salt, flour, sugar when she could afford it, needles and thread, lamp oil. She would enter the store, gather what she needed, place her coins on the counter, and leave. Sometimes the transaction occurred in complete silence. Other times, there would be comments not directed at her, but loud enough for her to hear. Some people don't know when they're not wanted. Cursed, that one is. Bad luck follows her. Should have left years ago. Eleanor had learned not to respond. Engaging only made things worse. She kept her eyes down, her expression neutral, her movements efficient. Get in, get what you need, get out, survive another month. Young Sarah Cooper, the blacksmith's daughter, sometimes watched Eleanor with open curiosity. The girl was perhaps 15, old enough to question but young enough to still be controlled by her parents. Once, Sarah had smiled at Eleanor, a small, tentative expression of human kindness. Eleanor had smiled back, and for just a moment the dusk weight of isolation had lifted. But Sarah's mother had seen the exchange and dragged her daughter away, scolding her loudly about the dangers of associating with cursed women. Sarah never smiled again, though sometimes Eleanor caught her watching from a distance, her young face troubled. In the evenings, after the chores were done and the fire banked for the night, Eleanor would sit at the small table James had made and write in her leather journal. She had started the journal the day after James's funeral, needing somewhere to put the words she could no longer speak aloud. Over the years, it had become her only confidant. She wrote about her days, her memories, her fading hopes. She wrote letters to James, telling him about the life she lived without him. She wrote prayers that felt like they fell on deaf ears. The journal was nearly full now, its pages crowded with her small, neat handwriting. Sometimes she would flip back through the years, reading entries from a decade ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. She could trace the evolution of her loneliness, from raw and bleeding to dull and constant, from something that felt like it might kill her to something she had simply learned to carry. She had long since stopped expecting anything to change. This was her life. This was all it would ever be. She would grow old in this cabin, alone, and one day she would die here, and perhaps it would be weeks before anyone noticed. Perhaps they would find her journal and finally understand what they had done to her. Or perhaps they would simply burn it, along with everything else she owned, and pretend she had never existed at all. Eleanor Hartwell, at 42 years old, had survived 23 years of isolation. But survival, she had learned, was not the same as living. It was simply the act of continuing to breathe, day after day, without purpose or joy or hope, and she had become very, very good at it. Winter came early that year. By mid-November, first serious snow had already fallen, blanketing the frontier in white silence. Eleanor knew she needed to make a trip to town before the worst of the weather set in. Her supplies of flour and salt were running dangerously low, and the lamp oil was nearly gone. She could endure many hardships, but facing a Montana winter, without light or the ability to make bread, was a risk she could not take. She hitched her mare, Patience named for the virtue Eleanor had needed most over the years, to the small cart, and set out just after dawn. The journey to Cedar Falls took nearly an hour in good weather. With snow on the ground and more threatening in the heavy grey clouds overhead, it would take longer. Eleanor wrapped herself in James's old wool coat, still serviceable after all these years, and pulled a knitted shawl over her head and shoulders. The town was quiet when she arrived. Most people were staying indoors, preparing for the storm that everyone could feel coming. Eleanor guided Patience to the hitching post outside Henley's general store and climbed down from the cart. Her breath formed clouds in the cold air. She stood for a moment, gathering her resolve the way she always did before entering the store, before facing the stares and whispers and deliberate silences. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. The store was warm, heated by a large pot-bellied stove in the center. 3 women stood near the counter, examining fabric. Martha Henley, of course, along with Susan Cooper and Rachel Barnes. They looked up when Eleanor entered, and their conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eleanor moved quickly to the shelves where the flour was kept. She needed 2 sacks to last the winter. She hefted them into her arms, then moved to collect salt, lamp oil, and a small bag of sugar that she had been saving for. It was an extravagance, but Christmas was coming, and even in her isolation, she wanted to mark the day with something sweet. "I'm surprised you dare. Show your face in town." Martha Henley's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Eleanor did not respond. She carried her supplies to the counter and set them down carefully. "Did you hear me?" Martha stepped closer, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "I said I'm surprised you dare show your face here." "I need supplies, Mrs. Henley." "Same as anyone." Eleanor's voice was quiet but steady. She reached into her pocket for the coins she had counted out that morning. "Same as anyone." Martha laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're not the same as anyone. You're a curse on this town. You've been a curse since the day you arrived." Susan Cooper shifted uncomfortably. Rachel Barnes looked away. Neither spoke up. Eleanor placed the coins on the counter. "This should cover it." "Should it?" Martha made no move to take the money or ring up the purchase. "Should we even sell to you? Every time you come here, something bad happens. Last time you were in town, the Millers lost half their herd to disease. The time before that, the Thompson boy broke his arm. Those things had nothing to do with me." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but she kept them pressed flat on the counter. "Didn't they?" Martha leaned forward. "Your husband died because of you. That's a fact, and ever since this town has suffered, crops fail, people get sick, children have accidents, and you just keep coming back, bringing your misery with you. That's not fair, Martha." The voice came from the back of the store. Sarah Cooper, Susan's daughter, had been arranging canned goods on a shelf. She stepped forward now, her young face troubled. "Miss Hartwell hasn't done anything wrong." "Sarah, be quiet," her mother hissed. "But it's not right," Sarah insisted. "She's just buying supplies like anyone else." "Why can't we just—" "Because she doesn't belong here," Martha interrupted. "She never has. And the sooner she accepts that and leaves, the better off we'll all be." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. 23 years of endurance, of swallowing her pain, of accepting the unacceptable. 23 years, and she had never once defended herself, never once pushed back. But there was something in Martha's eyes now, a cruelty that went beyond mere coldness, that finally broke through Eleanor's carefully maintained composure. "I lost my husband," Eleanor said, her voice low but clear. "I lost everything, and instead of helping me, instead of showing even a shred of Christian kindness, this town turned on me, you turned on me. And for what? Because you needed someone to blame? Because it was easier than facing the truth?" "The truth?" Martha's face went red. "The truth is, you should never have come here. You were never meant for frontier life. You were too soft, too refined, too what?" Eleanor's voice rose now, years of suppressed anger finally finding release. "Too alive, too hopeful, too foolish to believe that people would treat me with basic human decency." Martha grabbed the flour sacks from the counter and shoved them toward Eleanor. They tumbled off the edge, hitting the floor with heavy thuds. The bag of sugar followed, splitting open and spilling white crystals across the worn floorboards. "There are your supplies," Martha said coldly. "Take them and get out. And don't come back. We'll have someone leave supplies at the edge of your property from now on. I don't want to see your face in my store again." Eleanor stared at the mess on the floor. The sugar she had saved for, the small luxury she had allowed herself, was ruined. Something inside her, the last fragile thread of hope that maybe, somehow, things could get better, snapped. She turned and walked out of the store without another word, without gathering the supplies she had paid for, without looking back. The bell chimed again as the door closed behind her. She untied Patience from the hitching post, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the knot. She climbed into the cart and took up the reins, but she could not make herself turn toward home. Not yet. The cabin, with its silence and its memories and its crushing solitude, felt like a tomb. She could not go back there, not in this moment. Instead, she guided Patience away from town, toward the forest that bordered the eastern edge of Cedar Falls. The tears came before she reached the tree line. Great, wrenching sobs that she had held back for so long they felt like they might tear her apart. She let Patience stop and simply sat in the cart, weeping like she had not wept since James's funeral. For her lost husband, for her lost life, for the 23 years she had spent in exile, for the person she might have been if the world had been kinder. Eventually the sobs subsided into quiet tears, and the quiet tears into exhausted breathing. Eleanor wiped her face with her shawl and looked around. She had driven further than she intended. The cart sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. Snow had begun to fall, fat, heavy flakes that would soon cover everything. She should turn back. She should go home. But the thought of the cabin, empty and cold, waiting for her like it had waited for her every day for 23 years, was unbearable. Instead, Eleanor climbed down from the cart. She walked into the forest, her dress catching on low branches, her shoes sinking into the snow. She walked until she could no longer see the clearing, until the trees surrounded her on all sides. Then she stopped, leaned against a large pine, and slid down to sit at its base. The cold seeped through her dress. Snow fell on her uncovered head, melting into her hair. She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, making herself as small as possible. She thought, in a distant, detached way, that if she simply stayed here, the cold would eventually claim her. It would be painless, they said, like falling asleep. And then she heard footsteps. Eleanor looked up, her vision blurred by tears and melting snow. A figure approached through the trees, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing furs and carrying a rifle across his back. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in these woods, who knew them as well as Eleanor knew her garden. He stopped a few feet away and regarded her with eyes that were startlingly blue in his weathered face. He had a thick beard, streaked with grey, and long hair tied back at his neck. He looked to be in his 50s, though the hard lines of his face suggested a life that had not been easy. "You're going to freeze out here," he said. His voice was deep and calm, stating a fact rather than expressing concern. "I know," Eleanor said. The man studied her for a long moment. "You aiming to freeze?" Eleanor did not answer. She did not know the answer. "Well," the man said, "I can't just leave you here. That wouldn't sit right." He shrugged off his pack and began gathering dry branches from beneath the sheltering boughs of the surrounding pines where the snow had not reached. "Name's Caleb Stone, and you are?" "Eleanor Hartwell." Her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "Pleased to meet you, Eleanor Hartwell." Caleb arranged the branches in a careful stack and pulled out flint and steel. Within moments, he had a small fire burning. "Come closer to the warmth. We can talk, or we can sit quiet. Your choice." "But we're not freezing today." Eleanor found herself moving toward the fire, drawn by its warmth and by something else. The simple, unexpected kindness of a stranger who had not turned away. Martha Henley's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a furious crimson. For a long moment she simply stared at Caleb, clearly unused to being challenged so directly. The crowd waited, holding its collective breath. "Fine," Martha finally spat. "She can have her supplies, but don't think this changes anything." She disappeared into the store and returned moments later with 2 sacks of flour, salt, and a replacement bag of sugar. She thrust them at Eleanor without meeting her eyes. "There. Satisfied?" "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly, though the words tasted bitter. This was not kindness, it was capitulation under pressure. But it was supplies, and that was what mattered. As they loaded the goods into the cart, Eleanor noticed Sarah Cooper edging closer. The girl glanced nervously at her mother, who stood tight-lipped beside Martha, then stepped forward anyway. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly, "for how we've treated you. It wasn't right." Eleanor felt a warmth bloom in her chest. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." The ride back to the cabin was quiet. Caleb seemed lost in thought, and Eleanor was still processing what had happened. Someone had stood up for her. Someone had challenged the narrative that had defined her life for more than 2 decades. It felt surreal. Over the following days, Eleanor found herself changing in small ways. She began cleaning corners of the cabin that she had neglected for years. She took down the old curtains, dusty and faded, and began sewing new ones from fabric she had been saving. She even started working on a quilt, piecing together scraps of cloth with no clear plan, simply enjoying the act of creation. Caleb noticed the changes. "Place is looking brighter," he commented one afternoon as he brought in a load of firewood. "I suppose I'm feeling brighter," Eleanor admitted. She held up a square of blue fabric. "I don't even know why I'm making this quilt. I have perfectly good blankets, but I woke up this morning and just wanted to make something new, something that hasn't been here for 23 years. "That's called hope," Caleb said gently. "It's a good look on you." That evening, as they shared a simple supper of venison stew and bread, Caleb grew unusually quiet. He kept starting to speak, then stopping himself, until finally Eleanor set down her spoon and looked at him directly. "What is it? You've been wrestling with something all evening." Caleb met her eyes. "I had news today when I was in the woods checking my traps. Ran into a man who works at the Triple Creek Ranch, about 30 miles west of here. They're looking for someone to help with their horses through the winter. Good pay, room and board. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. You're leaving. That's the thing, I'm not sure I want to. Caleb leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the table. I've been thinking a lot these past 2 weeks. About what I'm doing, where I'm going. For 15 years, I've been drifting. No destination, no purpose. Just moving from place to place, trying to outrun grief. And now, I've found something worth staying for. He paused. Someone worth staying for. If she wants me to stay. Eleanor's heart began to race. Caleb! A knock at the door interrupted. Her. They exchanged glances, both surprised. Eleanor rarely had visitors even now, and certainly not after dark. She rose and opened the door to find Martha Henley standing on her porch, flanked by Susan Cooper and another woman, Eleanor recognized as Martha's neighbor. Mrs. Hartwell, Martha said stiffly, we need to speak with your friend. Alone. Caleb appeared behind Eleanor. Anything you have to say to me can be said in front of Eleanor. Very well. Martha straightened her shoulders. We've come to warn you. Eleanor Hartwell is not what she seems. She's brought nothing but misfortune to this town. Her husband died because of her. There have been crop failures, livestock deaths, children falling ill, all since she arrived. Those are lies, Caleb said calmly, and you know it. Are they? Martha's eyes glittered. Ask her about the night her husband died. Ask her where she was. Ask her why a healthy man would pick a fight over a woman who wasn't even there. Eleanor felt ice form in her veins. This was the old accusation, the one that had haunted her for years. That she should have been in town that day. That if she had been, James would still be alive. I was home, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. I was feeling ill. I thought I might be expecting a child. How convenient, Martha sneered. A husband dies defending a wife who wasn't even by his side. And there was no child, was there? Just another lie. It wasn't a lie, Eleanor's voice broke. I lost the baby 2 days after I buried my husband. I lost everything. The revelation hung in the air. Eleanor had never told anyone about the miscarriage, had buried that pain so deep she rarely let herself think about it. But now it was out, raw and bleeding. Susan Cooper's face had gone pale. Martha, you never said, she's lying. Martha insisted, but there was less certainty in her voice now. She's always lying. No, Caleb said firmly. She's telling the truth. I can see it. Anyone who actually looks at her can see it. He stepped forward, placing himself between Eleanor and the 3 women. Eleanor has done nothing wrong. Not 23 years ago. And not now. The only question is why you've spent so long trying to destroy her. Martha's composure cracked. For just a moment, Eleanor saw something beneath the anger, pain, deep and old. Then Martha's face hardened again. You'll regret taking her side, Martha said coldly. This town doesn't forgive easily. And it doesn't forget. Then this town and I have something in common, Caleb replied. Because I don't forget when I've seen injustice. And I don't forgive people who perpetuate it. The 3 women left, their footsteps crunching in the snow. Eleanor sagged against the doorframe, exhausted. Caleb guided her back inside and settled her in the chair by the fire. You never told me about the baby, he said gently. I couldn't. I've never told anyone. Eleanor stared into the flames. I felt like proof that I was cursed, that I wasn't meant to be a mother, that God was punishing me for something. God doesn't work that way. How do you know? Because I lost a wife and 2 children to fever, and I know it wasn't punishment. It was just life being hard and unfair. Caleb knelt beside her chair. Eleanor, look at me. She did. His blue eyes were steady and kind. You are not cursed. You are not being punished. You're just a good person who has suffered more than anyone should have to suffer. And if you'll let me, I'd like to help change that. What are you saying? Caleb took her hands in his. I'm saying, I don't want to take that ranch job. I don't want to keep drifting. I want to stay here, with you. I want to help you rebuild your life. And maybe, he paused, seeming to gather courage, maybe build a life together. If you'd have me. Eleanor stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're strong and kind and resilient. I know you make me feel less alone. I know that for the first time in 15 years, I can imagine a future that doesn't involve just surviving. His grip on her hands tightened. Eleanor Hartwell, will you marry me? The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor's mind raced. It was too fast, too sudden. They had known each other barely 2 weeks. But then again, she had known James for only 3 months before they married, and those had been the happiest months of her life before tragedy struck. And more than that, she was so tired of being alone, so tired of the endless silence, the crushing solitude. Caleb was offering her a chance at connection, at partnership, at something like happiness. Could she really turn that away? I'm afraid, she whispered. So am I, Caleb admitted. But I'm more afraid of walking away from this and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, her small and pale, his large and weathered, and felt something settle in her chest. A decision, a choice. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb's face broke into a smile, the first genuine, unguarded smile Eleanor had seen from him. He stood and pulled her up into an embrace that was gentle but firm, and Eleanor felt herself relax into it. When had she last been held? When had she last felt this safe? I need you to understand something, she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. I'm not doing this out of desperation. I'm not saying yes just because I'm lonely. I know that. Do you? Because I need you to know that I see you. I see the good man you are. I see your kindness and your strength and your patience. This isn't about rescue. This is about, she pulled back to look at him, this is about choosing to try again, together. That's all I wanted to hear. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. This was my mother's ring, the only thing I kept when I left civilization behind. I've carried it for 15 years, never thinking I'd have reason to give it to anyone. Eleanor took the ring carefully, feeling the weight of it, both physical and emotional. It's beautiful. It's not fancy, Caleb said, but it's real. And it's been blessed by a love that lasted 40 years. My parents were married until the day my father died. If this ring carries any of that luck, any of that devotion, I'd be honored for you to wear it. Eleanor slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. When should we marry? As soon as possible, unless you want a long engagement? Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, one that came from a place of joy rather than bitterness. I've waited 23 years for a second chance at life. I don't want to wait any longer. They decided to approach Reverend Thomas the next day. The Reverend was a complicated figure in Cedar Falls, kind enough at heart, but weak-willed, too easily swayed by the stronger personalities in his congregation. Still, he was the only person who could perform a marriage, and Eleanor hoped he would agree. Reverend Thomas lived in a small house behind the church. When Eleanor and Caleb knocked on his door the next morning, he answered with obvious reluctance, his eyes darting between them nervously. Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Stone, what can I do for you? We'd like you to marry us, Caleb said simply. The Reverend's face went pale. Marry you? But Mrs. Hartwell, are you certain this is wise? The town has no say in my life anymore, Eleanor said firmly. We're asking you as a man of God to perform the sacrament of marriage. Will you do it? Reverend Thomas wrung his hands. Mrs. Henley will be furious, the congregation. The congregation will follow your lead if you show some backbone, Caleb said, his tone sharper now. "You've stood by and watched this woman be persecuted for 23 years. Isn't it time you did something right?" The Reverend flinched. "That's not fair. I've tried to be kind. Kindness in private means nothing when you allow cruelty in public," Eleanor said. "But this is your chance, Reverend. A chance to do the right thing, publicly, where it matters." Reverend Thomas was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his conscience. Finally, he sighed. "Very well. I'll perform the ceremony, but I won't lie to you, there will be consequences. Mrs. Henley has a great deal of influence." "Let her have her influence," Caleb said. "We're not asking for the town's approval. We're asking for a marriage." They set the date for 1 week hence, giving the Reverend time to post the banns and Eleanor time to prepare. As they walked back toward Eleanor's cabin, they encountered Sarah Cooper drawing water from the town well. The girl looked up, saw them, and smiled tentatively. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then hurried over. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Are you really getting married?" "We are," Eleanor confirmed. Sarah's smile widened. "I'm so happy for you, Mrs. Hartwell. You deserve to be happy." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "These are wildflowers I pressed last summer. I was saving them for, well, I don't know what I was saving them for, but I'd like you to have them. For your wedding." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. She took the bundle carefully. "Thank you, Sarah. This means more than you know. I wish I could come to the ceremony," Sarah said wistfully. "But my mother would never allow it." "I understand. But thank you for this." Eleanor squeezed the girl's hand. "You've shown me more kindness than most people in this town." After Sarah hurried away, Eleanor and Caleb continued their walk in comfortable silence. But as they neared the cabin, Eleanor noticed something that made her stop short. Someone had left a pile of supplies on her porch: flour, sugar, salt, coffee, and even a jar of honey. There was no note, no indication of who had left them, but it was clear that someone in Cedar Falls had left these gifts anonymously, unwilling to face Martha Henley's wrath, but also unwilling to remain completely silent. "Things are changing," Caleb observed. "Maybe," Eleanor said cautiously. "Or maybe this is just one kind person who's too afraid to show their face. One kind person is a start." Over the next few days, the pile of anonymous gifts grew. Someone left a length of beautiful blue fabric that would make a perfect dress. Someone else left candles and a bottle of wine. Each morning, Eleanor would find something new, and each morning she would wonder who in Cedar Falls was brave enough to give, but still too afraid to be known. Then, 3 days before the wedding, the first open gesture of support arrived. Reverend Thomas brought a letter to the cabin, delivered to him by a young boy. The letter was from 3 families in Cedar Falls: the Coopers, the Millers, and the Johnsons, expressing their support and their apologies for years of silence. "Sarah convinced her parents," Reverend Thomas explained, "and they convinced the others. It's not everyone, Mrs. Hartwell, but it's a start." That evening, as Eleanor sat sewing the blue fabric into a simple wedding dress, Caleb sat across from her, working a piece of leather into a new belt. The domesticity of it struck Eleanor, this quiet partnership, this shared space, this sense of building something together. "Are you sure about this?" she asked suddenly. "Once we're married, the town will turn on you too. You'll be associated with me, with all the suspicion and blame." Caleb looked up from his work. "Eleanor, I've lived alone in the mountains for 15 years. I've faced bears and blizzards and solitude so deep it could drive a man mad. A few narrow-minded townspeople don't scare me," he smiled. "Besides, I'd rather face their disapproval with you than face another day without you." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "I don't deserve you. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." 2 days before the wedding, Eleanor received a letter. It was slipped under her door in the early morning hours, and she found it when she woke and went to stoke the fire. The envelope was unmarked, sealed with plain wax, and something about it made Eleanor's hands shake as she opened it. The message inside was brief and unsigned. "If you go through with this wedding, you will regret it. He will leave you like everyone else. Or worse, he will die like your husband did. Some people are meant to be alone. Accept it before someone else gets hurt." Eleanor stared at the words until they blurred. The threat was clear, even if the author was not. She considered hiding the letter from Caleb, but they had promised honesty with each other. When he arrived that morning with fresh game for breakfast, she handed him the letter without a word. Caleb read it, his jaw tightening. "This is Martha Henley's doing." "You don't know that. Who else would it be?" He set the letter on the table. "Eleanor, this doesn't change anything. We're still getting married. But what if something happens to you? What if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow? What if the creek runs dry? What if 100 other things that might or might not happen?" Caleb took her hands. "We can't live our lives based on what might happen. We can only make choices based on what we know now, and I know I want to marry you." Despite his reassurance, Eleanor could not shake the unease that settled over her. That afternoon, while Caleb was in town gathering supplies for their wedding meal, Sarah Cooper arrived at the cabin, breathless and clearly distressed. "Mrs. Hartwell, I had to come. I had to warn you." The girl's words tumbled out. "I heard my mother and Mrs. Henley talking. They're planning something for your wedding day. I don't know exactly what, but Mrs. Henley said she would make sure the marriage never happens." Eleanor felt cold. Dread settled in her stomach. "Thank you for telling me, Sarah. Does your mother know you're here?" "No. She'd be furious if she knew." Sarah glanced over her shoulder nervously. "I should go, but please, be careful." After Sarah left, Eleanor sat alone in the cabin, the letter and the warning weighing on her. Perhaps she should call off the wedding. Perhaps it was selfish to drag Caleb into her cursed existence. Perhaps Martha was right, and some people were simply meant to be alone. She was still sitting there when Caleb returned, and he knew immediately that something was wrong. When she told him about Sarah's warning, his expression grew serious. "Then we need to know what we're facing." He stood, decision made. "I'm going to talk to Martha Henley directly. Get her to tell me the truth. Caleb, no. I won't let her hide behind threats and anonymous letters anymore." He kissed Eleanor's forehead. "Trust me. I'll be back before dark." But he was not going to Martha's house. Instead, Caleb went to the church, where he found Reverend Thomas preparing Sunday's sermon. "I need the truth," Caleb said without preamble. "Why does Martha Henley hate Eleanor so much? What really happened 23 years ago?" The Reverend looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Stone, it's not my place. It became your place when you agreed to marry us. If there's something I should know, tell me now." Reverend Thomas sighed heavily and set down his Bible. Martha had a younger sister, Caroline. Beautiful girl, full of life. She was in love with a young man who'd come to Cedar Falls to homestead James Hartwell, Eleanor's husband. Caleb felt something click into place. James was kind to Caroline, but he didn't return her feelings. When Eleanor arrived in town and James courted her instead, Caroline was heartbroken. She left Cedar Falls shortly after their wedding, said she couldn't bear to watch them together. What happened to her? She died 6 months later. Illness, they said, but Martha always believed it was a broken heart. She blamed Eleanor for stealing James, for driving Caroline away, for her sister's death. The Reverend's voice was heavy with old sorrow. It was grief talking, not sense. But grief can be a powerful thing. Caleb stood silent, processing this information. "So, Eleanor has paid for 23 years because Martha couldn't accept that her sister's love was unrequited?" "I'm not excusing it," Reverend Thomas said quickly. "What Martha did was wrong, but you asked for the truth. And that's it. Martha lost her sister and needed someone to blame. Armed with this knowledge, Caleb did go to Martha Henley's house. He found her in her garden, pulling up the last of the autumn vegetables before the ground froze completely. "I know about Caroline," he said. Martha's hands stilled on the turnip she was pulling. Slowly, she straightened and faced him. "Who told you? Does it matter? I know your sister loved James Hartwell. I know she left town when he married Eleanor. And I know she died. And you blamed Eleanor for it. She killed my sister as surely as if she'd driven a knife into her heart," Martha said, her voice shaking with old rage. "No. She married a man who didn't love your sister. That's not the same thing." Caleb kept his voice steady. "Your sister's death was a tragedy. But it wasn't Eleanor's fault, and punishing her for 23 years won't bring Caroline back." "You don't understand." "I understand grief," Caleb interrupted. "I lost my wife and children. I know what it is to need someone to blame, to be angry at the unfairness of it all. But I also know that destroying an innocent person's life doesn't ease that pain. It just spreads it." Martha's face twisted. "She took everything from me. My sister was all I had, and she drove her away." "Eleanor didn't drive anyone away. Your sister left because she couldn't have what she wanted. That's no one's fault, not Eleanor's, not James's, not even Caroline's. It's just life being hard. I don't expect you to understand." Martha turned back to her garden. "Go ahead and marry her. But don't say I didn't warn you. Misfortune follows that woman. The only misfortune that's followed Eleanor is you." That evening, Caleb told Eleanor everything he'd learned. They sat together in the cabin, and Eleanor listened with growing understanding and, strangely, a measure of compassion. "I never knew Caroline," she said softly. "James mentioned her once or twice, said she was a nice girl, but not someone he had feelings for. I had no idea she loved him. No idea she left because of us. It wasn't because of you," Caleb corrected gently. "It was because of her own heartbreak. You can't be blamed for who James loved." Eleanor stood and went to the small trunk where she kept her few precious belongings. She dug through old letters and mementos until she found what she was looking for, a faded photograph that James had kept in his pocket. She had found it among his things after he died, but had never looked at it closely. Now she did. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile standing beside James. But James was looking away from the camera, his expression polite but distant. The woman, Caroline, Eleanor now knew, was looking at James with unmistakable longing. "Look at this," Eleanor said, showing Caleb the photograph. "Look at her face. She's looking at him like he's her whole world. But look at him, he's not even really seeing her." Caleb studied the photograph. "This must have been before you arrived. It's the proof Martha needs to see. Her sister loved James, but he didn't love her back. It's right there. In this photograph, James couldn't help who he loved any more than Caroline could. Will you show it to her?" Eleanor considered this. "I don't know if it would help. Sometimes people hold on to their anger because it's all they have left of the person they lost. If Martha lets go of her blame, what does she have left? The truth, and maybe some peace." The next morning, one day before the wedding, Eleanor made a decision. She would go to Martha Henley and show her the photograph. She would tell Martha that she understood the pain of losing someone, that she was sorry for Caroline's death, even though it wasn't her fault. Caleb wanted to come with her, but Eleanor insisted on going alone. "This is between me and Martha, woman to woman, grief to grief." Eleanor found Martha in her home, sitting in a chair by the window with a piece of embroidery in her lap. Martha looked up when Eleanor was shown in by the housekeeper, and her face hardened immediately. "What do you want?" "I want to show you something." Eleanor sat down uninvited and placed the photograph on the small table between them. "This is your sister, isn't it?" "With my husband, before I came to town." Martha's hand trembled as she picked up the photograph. Her face crumpled as she looked at it. Really looked at it. Perhaps for the first time. "She loved him so much," Martha whispered. "I can see that." And I'm sorry she was hurt. I'm sorry she died. But Martha, look at James in this photograph. Look at how he's standing, how he's looking away. He cared for her, I'm sure, but he didn't love her the way she loved him. That's not anyone's fault. It's just the way hearts work sometimes. She died because of a broken heart. She died because life is unfair and tragic, and sometimes there's no one to blame. Eleanor leaned forward. I know what it's like to lose someone you love. James was taken from me violently and senselessly. I wanted someone to blame too, but blaming Tucker, blaming the men who lied for him, blaming myself, none of it brought James back. It just poisoned me. Martha was crying now, silent tears running down her face. I've been so angry for so long. I know, but Martha, I'm not your enemy. I never was. We're both women who lost people we loved. We both know what grief feels like. Can't we find some way to move past this? For a long moment, Martha said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I don't know if I can. Then at least stop trying to hurt me. Please. I'm getting married tomorrow to a good man who makes me feel less alone. Let me have this. Let me have one day of happiness after 23 years of sorrow. Martha looked at the photograph again, at her sister's hopeful face and James's distant expression. Something seemed to break in her, some long-held wall crumbling under the weight of truth. I'll leave you alone, she said finally. I won't disrupt your wedding. But I can't promise more than that. Not yet. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even reconciliation. But it was enough. Eleanor left Martha's house feeling lighter than she had in years. The truth was out. The photograph had shown what words could not, and while Martha might never fully let go of her anger, she had agreed to let Eleanor have her wedding day in peace. That was all Eleanor could ask for. The day before the wedding dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to promise good things. Eleanor woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and lingering apprehension. Despite Martha's promise not to disrupt the ceremony, Eleanor could not quite shake the fear that something would go wrong. Caleb arrived shortly after sunrise, carrying a bundle of evergreen branches. For decorating the church, he explained. Figured we should make it look festive, even if it's just us and the Reverend. But it would not be just them and the Reverend. Over the course of the morning, several townspeople quietly approached Eleanor's cabin with offerings of support. The Millers brought a basket of apples and preserves. The Johnsons delivered a freshly baked cake, simple but lovingly made. Even old Mr. Peterson, who ran the livery stable and had never spoken more than 3 words to Eleanor in 23 years, stopped by with a bottle of whiskey for the celebration. Word's gotten around, Caleb observed as they watched Mr. Peterson drive away. Not everyone in this town agreed with how you've been treated. They were just too afraid of Martha to say so. Until now. Until now. You standing up to Martha, showing her that photograph, letting her see the truth, it's given other people courage. Sarah Cooper arrived in the afternoon with a gift that made Eleanor's breath catch. It was a wedding veil. Delicate and beautiful, clearly sewn with great care. I made it myself, Sarah said shyly, and Mrs. Miller helped with the lace, and Mrs. Johnson added the embroidery. We wanted you to have something special. Eleanor held the veil carefully, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. You made this? All of you? We worked on it together over the past 3 days. After you talked to Mrs. Henley, and the word spread about what really happened with her sister, some of us felt— Sarah paused, searching for words. We felt ashamed. We should have questioned the story years ago. We should have stood up for you. We didn't, and we can't change that. But we wanted to do something now. Eleanor felt tears well up. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. Thank you. After Sarah left, Eleanor sat with the veil in her lap, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her circumstances. A month ago, she had been utterly alone, resigned to living out her days in isolation. Now she was getting married, receiving gifts from neighbors, seeing the possibility of community after years of exile. "It's almost too much," she said to Caleb. "I keep waiting for a spears, something to ruin it." "Nothing's going to ruin it." Caleb sat beside her and took her hand. "But I understand the fear. After so many years of hurt, it's hard to trust in good things." That evening, Reverend Thomas visited the cabin. He looked troubled, and Eleanor's heart sank, fearing he had come to cancel the wedding. "I owe you an apology," the Reverend said instead. "I've written it out because I wanted to make sure I said it properly." He pulled a folded letter from his pocket. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have failed you grievously. As a minister of God, it was my duty to protect all members of my flock, especially those who were vulnerable and suffering. Instead, I stood by while you were persecuted. I told myself I was being diplomatic, keeping the peace, not taking sides. But neutrality in the face of injustice is not diplomacy, it's cowardice." Eleanor took the letter, surprised by the formality of it. "I cannot undo the past," Reverend Thomas continued, "but I can promise you that from this day forward you will have my full support. And tomorrow, when I join you and Mr. Stone in marriage, it will be with joy and without reservation." "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. "This means more than you know." After the Reverend left, Eleanor read the letter aloud to Caleb. It was thorough and unflinching in its self-examination, acknowledging specific moments when he should have intervened and had not. At the end, he wrote, "You have shown this town what grace looks like. In the face of cruelty, you remained kind. In the face of injustice, you sought understanding rather than revenge. You are a better Christian than any of us, and I am humbled by your example." "He's a good man," Caleb said, "just weak. But he's finding his strength now." "We're all finding something," Eleanor replied. "Strength, courage, hope, whatever we lost along the way." That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the next day. She would become Mrs. Caleb Stone. She would no longer be alone. She would have a partner, a companion, someone who saw her and valued her. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. What if she had forgotten how to be a wife? What if 23 years of isolation had broken something essential in her? What if Caleb eventually regretted his choice? Around midnight, unable to bear the circular thoughts any longer, Eleanor rose and lit a candle. She took out her leather journal, the same journal she had kept for 23 years, and turned to a fresh page. She wrote, "Tomorrow I marry Caleb Stone. I am afraid, not of him, but of hope. Hope has hurt me before. It promised me a future with James, and then tore that future away. It whispered that maybe the town would eventually accept me, and instead they grew crueler. Hope has been my enemy for so long that I barely recognize it as a friend. But Caleb is real. His kindness is real. The changes in the town are real. And I have to believe that this time, hope will not betray me. I have to believe that I deserve this second chance, at life, at love, at belonging. So tomorrow I will put on the blue dress I sewed and the veil that Sarah made. I will walk into that church with my head high. I will say my vows and mean every word. And I will choose hope, deliberately and courageously, one more time. James, if you can hear me wherever you are, I hope you understand. I will always love you and treasure our brief time together, but I am still alive, and I need to live. I think you would want that for me." Eleanor set down her pen and read over what she had written. It felt like a closing of one chapter and the opening of another. She turned back through the pages of her journal, reading entries from years past, the raw grief of the early days, the bitter resignation of the middle years, the slow erosion of hope. But the most recent entries were different. They mentioned Caleb's kindness, the wildflower he had given her, the feeling of being seen. They documented small joys, She had almost forgotten how to recognize the taste of real coffee, the warmth of a shared fire, the sound of another person's voice speaking her name with gentleness. Eleanor closed the journal and placed it back in the trunk. Tomorrow she would start a new journal, one that was not defined by loss and isolation. Or perhaps she would not keep a journal at all. Perhaps she would be too busy living to spend her evenings writing about life. The morning of the wedding arrived with more snow. Eleanor woke to find the world transformed into a winter wonderland, everything covered in fresh white powder that sparkled in the early light. It felt like a blessing, a clean slate. Caleb had spent the night in his camp, observing the tradition that the groom should not see the bride before the ceremony. But he had left a note under Eleanor's door, which she found when she went to start the fire. "Eleanor," the note read in his rough handwriting, "today we begin our life together. I promise to see you every day, to hear you every day, to value you every day. I promise to stand by you when the town is kind and when it is cruel. I promise to be your partner in all things. I promise to love you not because you need to be loved, but because you deserve to be loved. See you at the church." Caleb. Eleanor held the note to her chest, feeling her heart swell with emotion. This was really happening. After 23 years of waiting, of surviving, of simply enduring, something truly good was finally happening to her. She spent the morning preparing with more care than she had taken with anything in years. She washed her hair in water, heated over the fire, and dried it by the hearth. She put on her blue dress, carefully sewn to fit her perfectly. She placed the veil on her head and looked at herself in the small mirror that had belonged to James. The woman, looking back at her, was not the young bride of 23 years ago. She was older, marked by time and hardship, but there was something in her eyes that had not been there in years, a light, a hope, a readiness to embrace whatever came next. A knock at the door made her turn. It was Sarah Cooper, dressed in her Sunday best, with her mother standing behind her. "We've come to walk with you to the church," Sarah said, "if you'll have us." Eleanor looked at Susan Cooper, who had been one of Martha's most loyal allies for years. The woman looked uncomfortable but determined. "I'm sorry," Susan said simply. "For all of it, I'd like to make amends if you'll let me." "I would be honored to have you both walk with me," Eleanor said. As they made their way through the snow-covered town toward the church, Eleanor noticed curtains moving in windows. People were watching, some with hostility, surely, but others with curiosity and perhaps even approval. When they reached the church, Eleanor stopped at the door. Through the windows, she could see that the pews were not empty. At least a dozen townspeople had come. The Millers, the Johnsons, the Petersons, and others. They had come to bear witness to her wedding, to publicly align themselves with her, to make a statement that the old order was changing. And there, standing at the front of the church beside Reverend Thomas, was Caleb. He wore his best clothes, still simple, still frontier practical, but clean and carefully tended. When he saw Eleanor through the window, his face broke into a smile that transformed him from a weathered mountain man into something approaching joy. "Ready?" Sarah asked gently. Eleanor took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm ready." She pushed open the church door and stepped into her future. Eleanor's heart stopped. She turned, half expecting Martha Henley to storm in with some final act of sabotage. But it was not Martha. It was a woman Eleanor had never seen before, tall and dignified, perhaps in her 60s. She wore a dark traveling dress and carried herself with quiet authority. Behind her stood two men, clearly her escorts for the journey. The woman walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes fixed on Eleanor. When she reached the front of the church, she stopped and studied Eleanor's face with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "You're Eleanor," the woman said. It was not a question. "I am, and you are. My name is Margaret Hartwell. I was James's aunt." The woman's voice was gentle despite her formal bearing. I only learned recently of your existence and of what happened to my nephew. I came as soon as I could to find you." Eleanor felt the world tilt. James's family. She had never met any of them. James had been estranged from most of his relatives, making his own way on the frontier. She had assumed they either did not know about her or did not care. "I don't understand," Eleanor managed. Margaret glanced at Caleb, then back at Eleanor. "Perhaps we could speak privately, though I see I have interrupted your wedding. My sincere apologies. I did not know." "We just finished the ceremony," Reverend Thomas interjected kindly. "Perhaps you could join us for the celebration? There will be time to talk afterward." Margaret inclined her head. "That would be acceptable." The wedding party moved from the church to the small community hall next door, where the townspeople had set up tables laden with food and drink. It was a modest celebration compared to what some weddings might have, but to Eleanor it was overwhelming. All these people gathered to honor her marriage, to celebrate with her. But her mind was only half present. The other half was consumed with questions about Margaret Hartwell and what had brought her to Cedar Falls. Throughout the celebration, Margaret remained at the edges, watching quietly. She accepted a cup of cider and a plate of food, but spoke little, seeming content to observe. Finally, as the afternoon wore into evening, she approached Eleanor and Dolian de Caleb. "Could we speak now?" she asked. They stepped outside into the cold, away from the noise and warmth of the hall. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "I owe you an explanation," Margaret began, "and an apology. James was my sister's son. When he came west, we lost touch. My sister died shortly after, and I assumed James had built a life out here and was happy. I did not know he had married. I did not know he had died. Not until 3 months ago." "How did you find out?" Eleanor asked. "A mutual acquaintance happened to pass through Cedar Falls and heard the story. When he returned east, he mentioned it, not knowing I was related to James, but I recognized the name immediately." Margaret paused, her composure cracking slightly. "I made inquiries. I learned what happened to James, and I learned what happened to you afterward. The town's treatment of me, you mean?" "Yes, and I was appalled, horrified that my nephew's widow had been abandoned and persecuted for something that was not her fault." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "James had a small inheritance from his mother, my sister. It should have gone to you upon his death, but because we did not know about the marriage, it has sat in a bank in Philadelphia all these years. It is yours by right." Eleanor took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a bank draft for a sum that made her gasp more money than she had seen in her entire life. "This is too much. It is exactly what you are owed," Margaret said firmly. "And it is far less than you deserve after what you have endured. If I had known, I would have come for you years ago. I would have brought you back east, given you a home, a family." Eleanor felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what to say. Say you will use it to build a good life." Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from her. "I can see that you have already started with this marriage. Your husband seems a good man." "The best," Eleanor agreed, looking at Caleb. "Then I am content. I cannot undo the past, but I can ensure your future is secure." Margaret glanced back at the hall where the celebration continued. "I will stay in town for a few days. I would like to know you better, if you are willing. To learn about James's life here and yours. I would like that very much." As Margaret returned to the hall, Eleanor stood in the snowy evening with Caleb, holding the bank draft that represented financial security she had never imagined. "This changes everything," she said. "It changes some things," Caleb corrected. "But the important things stay the same. We're married, we're together, we're building a life. A life we can now build without worrying about every penny." Eleanor leaned against him. "We could improve the cabin, buy livestock, maybe even help others who are struggling. "We could do anything we want," Caleb agreed. "But right now, I want to get back to our wedding celebration. Come on, Mrs. Stone. Our guests are waiting." Eleanor smiled at the name Mrs. Stone. She was no longer Eleanor Hartwell, the cursed widow. She was Eleanor Stone, beloved wife, returned family member, woman with a future. They walked back into the warmth of the hall, hand in hand, ready to celebrate not just their wedding day, but the beginning of everything that would come after. 6 months passed like a dream. Spring came to Cedar Falls, melting the snow and bringing new growth to the land. Eleanor stood on the expanded porch of her cabin, their cabin now, hers and Caleb's, and looked out over the garden that had quadrupled in size. With the inheritance money, they had hired help to clear more land, build a proper barn, and purchase chickens, goats, and even a milk cow. But more than the physical improvements, it was the change in Eleanor's daily life that struck her most, profoundly. She was no longer alone. Caleb was beside her each morning when she woke, and each evening when she went to sleep. They worked together, ate together, planned together, and slowly, carefully, Eleanor was learning to accept that this was real and lasting. The town had changed too. Not completely, there were still those who avoided her, who clung to old prejudices, but enough. Martha Henley had left Cedar Falls 2 months after the wedding, moving to live with relatives in Oregon. Before she left, she had come to the cabin one final time. "I cannot undo the harm I caused," Martha had said, standing stiffly on the porch, unable to meet Eleanor's eyes. "And I cannot honestly say I have forgiven you, even though I know there is nothing to forgive. But I can remove myself from your life so that my presence no longer causes you pain." It was not the apology Eleanor might have hoped for, but it was something, an acknowledgement, an ending. With Martha gone, the social dynamics of Cedar Falls shifted noticeably. People who had been afraid to show kindness to Eleanor now felt free to do so. She received invitations to church socials, to quilting circles, to community gatherings. She did not accept all of them. 23 years of isolation had made her value her privacy, but she accepted enough to feel like she was finally part of the community. Sarah Cooper had become a regular visitor, stopping by at least once a week to help with the garden or simply to talk. The girl was bright and curious, asking Eleanor about her life before Cedar Falls, about books, about the wider world. Eleanor found herself becoming something of a mentor, lending Sarah books from her small collection and encouraging her natural intelligence. "You remind me of who I was at your age," Eleanor told Sarah one afternoon as they weeded the vegetable garden together. "Full of questions and dreams." "Did you achieve your dreams?" Sarah asked. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Not the ones I had at 15. Those dreams died with my first husband. But I have different dreams now. And yes, I think I'm achieving them." "What are they?" "Your current dreams?" "To build a good life with Caleb, to be useful to others, to maybe help people who are struggling the way I struggled." Eleanor pulled up a stubborn weed. "Your mother and I have been talking about starting a charity fund for widows and women in difficult circumstances, using some of my inheritance money to help them get back on their feet." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's wonderful. There are women in town who could use that kind of help. I know. I was one of them for 23 years. Margaret Hartwell had stayed in Cedar Falls for 2 weeks after the wedding, getting to know Eleanor and learning about James's life on the frontier. Before she returned to Philadelphia, she had made Eleanor promise to write regularly and to visit if she ever came east. "You are family," Margaret had said. "The last connection I have to my nephew. I will not lose you the way I lost him." The letters between them had become a source of joy for Eleanor. Margaret wrote about life in the city, about cultural events and family news. Eleanor wrote about the farm, about Caleb, about the slowly changing social landscape of Cedar Falls. It was a connection to a wider world that Eleanor had not realized she missed. One evening in late spring, as Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset, Caleb pulled out his silver pocket watch. He opened it, looked at the photograph of his first family, and then showed it to Eleanor. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about Anna and the children, about how I spent 15 years running from their memory. And I think it's time to stop running, to honor them properly." He closed the watch carefully. "I'd like to plant a tree for them, here, on our land, a memorial." Eleanor took his hand. "I think that's beautiful. We could plant one for James, too. A garden of remembrance," Caleb said, "for the people we loved and lost, and for the life we're building in their honor." The next day, they planted 3 trees at the edge of the property, a sturdy oak for Anna, 2 saplings for Thomas and Mary, and a mountain ash for James. Eleanor and Caleb stood together, hands joined, and said quiet prayers for the people who had shaped them but could not be with them. "They would want us to be happy," Eleanor said. "I think they would," Caleb agreed, "and I think we are." That night, Eleanor sat at the table with her old leather journal open before her. She had not written in it in weeks, too busy living to document her life. But tonight she felt moved to add one final entry. She wrote, "23 years ago, I lost my husband and my place in the world. I spent more than 2 decades believing I was meant to be alone, that I was somehow cursed or unworthy of love and community. I was wrong. I wasn't waiting for someone to save me. I was waiting for someone brave enough to truly see me, and for me to be brave enough to be seen. Caleb is that person. This life we're building together is everything I never dared to hope for. The cabin is warm and full. The garden is thriving. The town has slowly opened its arms to me, and I am happy. Truly, deeply, almost frighteningly happy. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I won't face it alone, and that makes all the difference." Eleanor closed the journal and set it aside. Tomorrow she would start a new journal, one focused on the future rather than the past. Or perhaps she would not keep a journal at all. Perhaps she would simply live, fully and presently, savoring each day as it came. Outside, the sun had set completely, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Caleb came to stand behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "Ready for bed?" he asked. Eleanor stood and turned to face him. This man who had changed. Everything with 2 simple words spoken in firelight 6 months ago. She took his hand and smiled. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They walked together into the cabin, into their home, their life, their carefully chosen future. And behind them, the door closed softly on 23 years of loneliness, leaving only hope and love and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come.